It started that night.
Rain had a way of swallowing sound in the Burmese jungle-thick sheets, crashing through the enormous teak trees, turning soil into sinking pits. But on most nights in the northern sector, the soldiers stationed at Hunter's Ridge said the rain wasn't the loudest thing out there. It was the marching. American Communications Officer Evan Mercer didn't believe the rumors when he first arrived in Myanmar for archival restoration work. He wasn't a soldier, just a historian, temporarily attached to a joint U.S.-Burmese recovery team. They were tasked with locating the remains of an entire WW2 battalion, the 313th Infantry, a unit that had vanished without a trace in 1944 during the push against the Imperial Japanese Army. No bodies, no dog tags, no equipment, just a final broken radio transmission. The trees, they're moving. If anyone in Vis's Torrens assumed the soldiers were ambushed or scattered in the jungle, but local guides told a different story. The 313th wasn't killed. They marched into the jungle and kept marching. Even now, Evan brushed those tales off as tradition stories. Locals told tourists to earn a little extra money. That is, until the second night. The rain had slowed to a mist. Crickets and cicadas hummed in the dark as the camp generators switched off one by one. Evan lay in his tent, reviewing old dispatches when the ground began vibrating the faintest tremor, like someone knocking softly under the earth. It grew steadier, rhythmic footsteps. Evan froze. He unzipped his tent, just enough to peer out, expecting the Burmese Rangers doing the patrol. But the Rangers were all gathered by the fire pit, staring into the tree line. No one moved. The footsteps came from deeper in the forest. Long, dragging steps. Hundreds of them. Evan stepped out of his tent, heart thudding. What is that? The Ranger leader, leathery, sun-worn man named U Thun didn't blink. They march when the moon is thin, he whispered. Who? Evan asked. He looked up slowly. The ones who never found their way home. A chill ran through Evan's spine. Evan stayed awake until the noise faded, replaced by distant metallic clinks like rifle slings tapping against belts. The next morning, half the recovery team wanted to leave immediately. Evan insisted they stay Eve. There was a rational explanation. He needed evidence. He was a historian, and mysteries didn't sit well with him. They pushed deeper into the jungle. Within a mile, the trees grew unnaturally dense, interlocking in twisted shapes as if knitting themselves closed. Several times, their compasses spun without reason. At noon, they reached a steep ridge and found something the recovery teams hadn't documented before: boot prints. Hundreds of them, deep in the soil, perfectly preserved, all facing the same direction east. Evan crouched beside one. The heel stamp read, U.S. Army, 1943, fresh looking. As if pressed yesterday. We're close, Evan muttered. Yuthon shook his head. No, they're close. The team continued until dusk before setting up camp in a clearing, but the forest felt wrong, as if it weren't a place meant for humans. The air was thick with humidity and something sweeter, almost rotten. That night, the footsteps returned, louder, closer. The trees shuddered. Something scraped against bark metal, fabric, bone. The Rangers whispered prayers. Evan grabbed his flashlight and radio. We need to see what that is. Yu Thun grabbed his arm. Do not follow. They do not want you to see. But Evan shook free. Then why are we here? If we're trying to recover soldiers, we need proof. A voice cut him off. Not a human voice. A low, static-laced murmur drifted through the trees, like a radio transmission swallowed by decades of silence. Advance. Keep formation. 313th move. Evan's blood ran cold. That's impossible, he whispered. Yuthun whispered. They are still obeying. against every instinct screaming in his skull. Evan moved toward the sound. The closer he got, the warmer the air became, like stepping into someone's breath. Leaves rustled as if brushed by unseen bodies. He lifted the flashlight. The beam hit. Movement shapes slipping behind trees, helmets, shoulders, rifles cradled in pale, mud-stained hands. The outlines of soldiers, but no faces, just shadowed hollows where eyes should have been. They marched single file, drenched in mud and mold, uniforms decayed into strips. Some carried rifles with vines coiling around the barrels. Others had bones protruding where flesh should have been. Each step left a wet imprint that faded seconds later, sucked back into the earth. Evan choked on his breath. He wasn't looking at living men. He wasn't even looking at ghosts. These things were stuck in MOTION, a battalion trapped in a loop older than Evan's entire lifetime. One of the soldiers paused mid-step, head turning sharply toward Evan, as if hearing him. The movement was unnatural, like a hinge snapping. The hollow eyes locked on him. Evan stumbled backward. The entire battalion stopped. Silence. Then they pivoted toward him in unison. Evan screamed and ran, crashing through roots and branches until he burst into camp. The Rangers grabbed him, demanding answers, but Evan couldn't speak. The forest behind him was silent. Too silent that the footsteps had stopped. That was worse. The air shifted. Every cricket, every bird went mute, strangled by an unseen presence. Evan whispered, "We need to leave, now." But the forest didn't want them. Two branches creaked like joints bending. The tree trunks seemed closer than before. The soil quivered. One ranger pointed with trembling hands. Boot prints were forming on the ground right toward the camp. Fresh prints, invisible, feet pressing into the mud. A voice rolled through the trees, distorted like a WW1 field transmission. "Fall in." Evan grabbed his pack and bolted. The Rangers followed, their flashlight beams slicing through the suffocating dark. Behind them, the prints multiplied, chasing them, catching up. One of the Rangers vanished mid-scream, yanked into the brush by unseen hands. The sound of fabric tearing, bones cracking, then nothing. Youthun dragged Evan forward. "Do not look back." But Evan did, and instantly regretted it. The battalion was there, dozens of decayed soldiers stepping out from between the trees, moving without sound, rifles clutched as if still in battle. Their faces were blooming with fungus and rot, mouths frozen open in silent commands. The frontmost soldier raised a rusted bayonet. The blade dripped with something black. Evan ran until his lungs screamed, until his legs turned numb. The jungle felt endless. Branches slashed his arms. Something cold brushed the back of his neck. Then, light. The edge of the jungle. The road.salvation.Yvonne collapsed beside a supply truck and didn't remember anything else. He woke up in a military medical tent days later. The U.S. recovery team questioned him for hours. They found no bodies, no prints, no evidence of Rangers. Only one thing remained from the site: a WW2 field radio. Half buried in mud, it still worked. It shouldn't have. Evan turned the dial, lips trembling, static, then a voice. "Advance, keep formation." 313th move. He dropped it last night. Evan swears he heard marching outside his apartment in Virginia. Slow, rhythmic, coming closer. The battalion wasn't in Burma anymore. They were following orders, and orders don't end just because the war did. The mud in the argon does something strange to sound. It swallows it. Private Ethan Hale realized this on his third night in the forward line, listening to the distant rattle of machine guns melt into the wet darkness like stones sinking underwater. The other men joked that the forest was cursed, that the earth remembered the dead and kept their echoes. Ethan didn't believe any of it. Not then. His platoon had been rotated to a forgotten trench system and old French line, abandoned and partially collapsed. Headquarters claimed it was strategically useful again. No one understood why. The front had moved on. The fighting had shifted miles east. This place should have been silent, empty. And yet, as they settled in, Ethan kept hearing something. Not voices hot, first butt movement, soft steps, wet boots, dragging. One of the corporals told him it was probably rats. Big ones, he said with a hollow laugh. These forests breed monsters. But rats didn't walk in formation. The first real incident happened on the 5th night. The men were half asleep in the dugout when static crackled through their field receiver. It wasn't connected to anything, just an old, battered set left behind by the French butt. The noise came anyway. Thin and metallic dot. Ethan sat up. Who's touching the radio? No one, the sergeant muttered from the dark. The static sharpened. A faint voice seeped through, speaking in French. Or trying to. The words were warped, stretched, too slow and too wet, like someone talking through a mouthful of mud. A few men crossed themselves. Others covered their ears. The voice kept repeating the same phrase, broken and unsure, like a dying man forgetting his own language. Then it stopped, and all the sounds of the forest stopped with it. The trench became impossibly still. Even the rain paused, as if the sky itself were holding its breath. A full minute passed before normal sound returned, the patter of drizzle, the creak of wet timber. The man didn't speak of it after that. They tried to bury it under jokes and card games. But Ethan noticed the way they avoided the radio, stepping around it like a grave. By the next night, the smell started. Rotting, leather, mold, old bandages left to ferment. It drifted into the trench with the wind, carrying a heaviness that clung to the throat. The sergeant ordered lantern checks, thinking an animal had died nearby. No animal smelled like that. No living thing did. Ethan couldn't sleep. The odor grew stronger after midnight, thick enough to taste. He climbed the firing step and looked out across the dark forest. The fog hovered low, rising from the ground in slow coils, light breath. That's when he heard footsteps, again dozens of them, faint but synchronized. They moved across the no man's land with the rhythm of soldiers marching, boots squelching in mud. Ethan strained his eyes but saw nothing. The fog shifted, and the footsteps stopped. He whispered to the soldier next to him, "Did you hear that?" But the man wasn't looking at him. He was staring forward, frozen, pale, his rifle trembling in his hands. Ethan followed his gaze. A shadow stood just beyond the edge of the trench. Not a man to distort it. Too wrong. Its outline flickered, like a candle behind warped glass. It didn't move. It simply stared. Ethan blinked, and it vanished, as though the fog had inhaled it. The next morning, a messenger arrived from HQ with strange orders. Hold this position, no matter what. Hold it, from what? There wasn't a German within miles. The messenger gave no clarification. He seemed eager to leave, practically running back down the communication trench. Ethan found it strange, almost fearful. The day passed quietly, and for a moment, Ethan thought maybe the night before had been exhaustion, stress, imagination. That hope lasted till sunset. The smell returned, so thick, even the seasoned veterans gagged. Lamps dimmed, as if struggling against the air itself. By 11 p.m., fog seeped into the trench, rising waist-high like ghostly water. The men huddled close, clutching rifles, whispering curses and prayers. Then the radio switched on by itself, static first. Then a voice, English this time, but cracked and mangled. It spoke Ethan's name. He froze. Private. Ethan Hale. The voice stretched the syllables like someone dragging nails across metal. Stand by. The sergeant shouted at him to ignore it. but the voice grew louder, as if reacting. Stand by, stand by, stand by. Ethan covered his ears. It didn't matter. The voice wasn't coming through sound, depressed into his skull like cold fingers. Then everything went quiet again. The trench lanterns went out all at once. Not blown out, snuffed. Something filled the trench, weightless, yet crushing. Like the air had turned to ice. Ethan felt a presence standing directly behind him. He couldn't breathe, couldn't move. He turned slowly. No one was there at first. Then shapes rose from the fog, silhouettes of men. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Their uniforms were shredded, rotted into their flesh. Some were missing limbs. Some had no faces. Just dripping mud packed into skulls. They didn't climb into the trench. They emerged from it, as though they'd been buried in the walls the whole time. The men screamed, rifles jammed. The sergeant fired point blank at one figure, but the bullet passed through like smoke. The figure didn't react, only tilted its head, curious. Like a child examining a dead insect. Then the whispering began, not in French, not in German, not in English, something older. It buzzed like insects in the dirt. Ethan felt it vibrating in his bones. His vision blurred as the shadows reached out, their arms stretching unnaturally far. One grabbed the soldier beside him, pulling him into the mud as if the ground had liquefied. The man disappeared without a sound. Ethan stumbled backward. He saw the radio glowing faintly in the dark, its dial turning on its own. The voice returned clearer now, colder, with a tone that almost sounded amused. You shouldn't have come back. Ethan had never been here before. He didn't understand. Then he saw it. Near the far wall of the trench stood a corpse American uniform, faded and decayed. The dog tags hung from its neck, clinking softly. Ethan Hale, his own name, same regiment, same number. It made no sense. Yet the body was there, unmistakably. Even the jawline was similar. The dead version of him stared with empty sockets, as if waiting. Ethan collapsed. His heartbeat roared in his ears. The fog closed in around him. The dead whispered louder, pressing in from every side. Something cold wrapped around his wrist, pulling. The last thing he heard was a voice from the radio, speaking gently now, almost fatherly. You're home at dawn. Reinforcements arrived. They found the trench empty. No bodies, no gear, no rifles. Only footprints, hundreds of them, leading out into the fog and vanishing after 10 feet. The radio was still running. Even without power, it repeated one phrase, over and over, in Ethan Hale's voice. Stand by. We're still here. No one ever rotated into that trench again. But on quiet nights, soldiers reported hearing footsteps marching in perfect formation through the Argonne. Long after the war ended, boots squelching in mud where no mud remained, voices whispering where no living men stood. And sometimes, when the fog is heavy enough, a figure appears at the tree-line American uniform. Dog tags, swinging, waiting, listening, calling someone back. I never believed in patterns. Not in the way conspiracy people talk, numbers repeating, broadcasts looping, hidden codes that only they can understand. But the night I heard the old Soviet distress call, the one supposedly decommissioned 40 years ago, something in me shifted. I've been a ham radio hobbyist since college, long enough to know when a signal is fake, spoofed, or bouncing off the ionosphere. Yet that transmission, whatever it was, felt wrong. Not technologically wrong, humanly wrong. Like it shouldn't exist, shouldn't be reachable, shouldn't be breathing through my speakers after decades of silence. It started on a cold Wednesday night in 2024, during one of the early winter storms sweeping across Montana. I lived alone outside Helena in a small cabin I was fixing up after leaving a job that burned me out. No neighbors within half a mile. Just trees, snow, and a Radio Shack I'd built behind the house. I went out there to kill time, scanning shortwave frequencies the way some people scroll TikTok. Snow hammered the roof. The heater strained. The cabin lights flickered with every gust. I turned the tuning dial lazily, letting static wash the room. Then something clicked. A tone, a pattern, not random. A 4-note chime I hadn't heard since I was a kid. I froze. That stupid chime was infamous. The UVB-76 dead hand signal. Cold War broadcast Russians supposedly used to indicate their command structure was intact. If the tone ever stopped, well, that meant nukes. Of course, conspiracy nerds online insisted the station still transmitted, but the real frequency had been silent for decades. I checked online logs. Nothing. Every database marked it inactive. Yet here it was, clear, loud, like it was broadcasting from the woods behind my house. After the 4 tones, a male voice distorted, thick with static spoke in Russian. But the cadence was what chilled me. I'd taken just enough Russian in college to recognize the structure. It was a distress call, repeated over and over. Cody, Protivnik, Obnarushin, Zaporoz Potber. Code, enemy. Detected, requesting support. The voice cracked mid-sentence, like it was old. Like the throat producing, it was dry and strained. I leaned closer, almost scared to breathe. My hand hovered over the recorder. I didn't press it. Something in my chest tightened, telling me not to. Then the voice changed. It didn't shift languages. It didn't shift accents. It shifted decades. The tone became frantic, higher pitched, young. Less military transmission, and more someone screaming into a microphone because everything around them was falling apart. The words garbled, dissolving into what sounded like metal scraping and boots running. I heard men yelling, panicked, not disciplined. Something clanged behind them. Something deep and resonant, like a massive steel hatch being slammed open or shut. Then, gunfire. Not Hollywood gunfire. Muffled, messy, too close to the mic. I pushed the chair back instinctively. The signal wavered, slowed, and the last thing I heard before the speaker burst into static was a sound so human it made my blood run cold. A man sobbing, not wounded, not shouting orders, sobbing like a terrified child. The transmission cut. The shack felt too silent. Even the storm outside paused. I wrote it off as signal interference. Old recordings bouncing around. Some military prank. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I shut the radio down and went back to the cabin. I tried to sleep. I couldn't at around 3 a.m., right when the wind hit the cabin hardest. My ham radio pager beeped, a page I didn't send, a frequency I hadn't programmed, the same one from earlier. I told myself not to go outside. I still put on my boots and trudged through the snow, because curiosity is stronger than fear until you're close enough to smell danger. The shack door was half open. I knew I had locked it. The radio inside was already on, spitting static. When I stepped in, something inside the static shifted like a whisper threading itself between the noise. Not Russian, not any language I recognized. I listened for maybe 3 seconds before feeling this pressure. Not physical, mental. Like the whisper wasn't meant to be heard by people. Then the 4-note chime played again. A different voice followed. A woman's this time. Young, weak, whispering like she was freezing. The transmission popped like she was too far away, underwater maybe. CDs, Timno, Ostaf Naz. Here, it's dark. Leave us. Something slammed loudly on the other end. Metal again. Then a scream. Wet, guttural, breaking off mid-breath. The static howled. I backed up so fast, I tripped on a tool bag. The radio kept going, volume rising as if someone was turning the knob from the other side. Then laughter, a low, broken, glitching laugh that didn't sound human at all. like someone was imitating laughter through a damaged throat. I yanked the power cable. The radio stayed on. At that point, I ran inside the cabin. I locked every door, every window, shoved a dresser in front of the back entrance. Snow hammered the roof like fists. Wind roared around the house. I sat on the floor, gripping my phone, watching the shack through the window. Around 4:12 a.m., the radio signal seeped through the walls. No device powered on. No wires, just the voice, slow, breathy, broken. "You heard us?" Covered my ears. My heartbeat felt wrong, uneven. The whisper grew louder. "You listened." The cabin lights flickered. The floor vibrated like a low-frequency hum was coming from underground. Something moved in the tree line. A shadow, tall, thin, leaning slightly, as if trying to hear better. I stayed awake until sunrise. When the light finally hit the snow, everything went silent like flipping a switch. I forced myself to check the shack. The radio was off, unplugged, cold. To the touch, I turned it on once, just once to make sure I hadn't imagined everything static, normal. Static, no chime, no voices, no whispers. I should have stopped there. Should have buried the equipment, burned the shack, moved to another state. But the next night, when the storm returned, the frequency lit up again. And this time, it wasn't Russian, it was English. A man.com, close to the mic, his voice low, like he was speaking right into my ear. "Don't ignore us again." The signal ended sharply. The power in the shack flickered, died, came back. The snow outside stopped falling all at once, like someone hit pause. Then, from just behind us shock a second voice, far too close, not from the radio. "It's your turn to answer." The recording I made of that night is still on my laptop. I've never replayed it. Don't want to hear what else was breathing into that microphone with him. I haven't slept properly in weeks. Every storm brings the frequency back. Every broadcast gets closer, clearer, more focused on tonight. As I write this, the wind has started again. The frequency light on my radio just blinked on by itself. The last message it sent, the one that made the hair on my arms rise, was just one sentence. "We found you."